Good morning. I just want to. We seem to have a bit of an echo. I'm not right.
No, that's fine. You're good.
Oh, there we are. Okay, we're good. We're good to go. Good morning to everybody. We're here again, beaming live from the club room at Bicester Motion in the heart of Oxfordshire. Another glorious sunny day. We had a very interesting day yesterday with a couple of good sessions on the webinar, and of course the Oxprop Fest Award ceremony last night, which, speaking from my own personal point of view, at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm pretty glad it didn't turn into the usual mash-up following a typical award ceremony. But here we are, fresh as a daisy, about to talk about some of the interesting things that that confront the property industry. So for those who don't know me, I'm Hugh Blaser. I retired as managing partner of a leading commercial property law firm a couple of years ago now. And since then, I've had the great pleasure of working with Matthew Battle, the founder and managing director of UK Property Forums, who are, of course, bringing this festival to you. It's fantastic that with the help of the good people here at Bicester Heritage, we've been able to put together this event. And thank you to everyone who signed up for this session and the others which we're running over these 2 days. So I'm very pleased to have chaired and to be chairing sessions on what are probably two of the most important issues confronting us today: where we live and how we travel. And as property is our thing, the aim of these sessions, and indeed all our sessions, is to discuss what we think are the most topical issues with a view to informing our property community and maybe help them get ahead of the curve when it comes to deciding what buildings and infrastructure will be needed and indeed how to produce them and provide them. Yesterday we had a fascinating debate about how our urban centres might look in the future and what we can do to achieve our vision for them. Our session today tackles the second of these issues, our transport networks. How do we travel, whether for work, business or pleasure? Transport then, what is it for? For business, getting to and from work, going on site, attending meetings, all part of the warp and weft of working life. Will working from home and the explosion of virtual meetings have a material impact, or will we gradually return to our pre-COVID ways of travelling? And in our private lives, will we still feel the need to jump on a plane in order to have a holiday? Or will we staycation more? We all know that the car completely revolutionised the way we lived in the last century. And I love cars, but I hate traffic jams. And I love driving, but I do feel guilty that I'm contributing towards the pollution of the planet when I do. Even before COVID, we had a dilemma. If travel inextricably underpins the way we live and work, how do we provide alternatives, economical and environmentally friendly ways of travel, particularly if we want to get people out of their cars? If there really is no plan B, is the answer more and better public transport? Or do we encourage people to fend for themselves, using where it's practicable to do so, e-bikes and e-scooters? And when I say we, who's leading the charge into this brave new world? Is it central government, local authorities, or the private sector, inspired by the need to be seen to be making its contribution towards achieving a zero carbon future? Or simply, is it a means of attracting companies to populate their developments? And how, with COVID still around, can we convince travellers that public transport is not only desirable and effective, but also safe, or at least no more risky than travelling in our own sealed private vehicles? Last, what does the property community see when it peers into its crystal ball? How, in planning new developments or settlements, are the developers factoring in new ways in which we move around, or at least want to move around? So here to address these challenges, I'm pleased to introduce our panel. They are Veronica Reynolds, Milton Park Sustainable Travel Advisor, David Allett, Transport Assessment Manager, Cambridge County Council, Elliot Page, Director of Transport, Stantec. So I'd like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. Press your camera button to come on screen. Make sure that you're not unmuted. And Veronica is paragon of virtue there, putting herself bang on the screen. I'm going to come out of the screen now, leaving it to Veronica, and then she will be followed by David and Elliot. I should just like to say one thing about Veronica. She actually lives and breathes what she talks about. Veronica cycles to and from her office, which is a round trip of 30 miles each day? Rain or shine, Veronica on her e-bike, living and breathing what she preaches, practicing what she preaches. Over to you, Veronica. I'm going to come out now and over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Hugh, for the introduction. It makes me sound very virtuous. I do sometimes use the car, but I try not to, and it really is just a question of getting into the habit of cycling. And I do cycle come rain or shine. It is just a matter of the right clothing. I think I can count on one hand the number of times where I was rained off last year. So a lot of it is about perception. So my role at Milton Park, as Hugh said, is the Sustainable Travel Manager here. And what I've been trying to do for the last 4 years is encourage more people to cycle, to use public transport, to car share, really just trying to reduce the number of cars on the park and on our roads. My background is actually in health psychology, and I'm a behaviour change psychologist by trade. So I bring to this role really all that understanding of what we do as human beings, what we like to do, why we do it, what motivates us. And I've used that really as a way of starting to change behaviour on the park, one person at a time, one company at a time, but we are having some success with that. Thank you. I'll leave it there and I'll come back to you later. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm David Allett. I'm the Transport Assessment Manager from Cambridgeshire County Council. My role involves working with developers on our exciting and ambitious growth proposals spread across the Cambridgeshire region. Our mission is to work with the developers to assess the transport impact of the proposals and indeed to make sure that those proposals come through in a sustainable way as possible. We've got a challenged area in that many of our corridors are highly congested. We're also a historic region where there are a lot of historic assets that need preserving, but also a huge opportunity. A good baseline in terms of cycling, many cyclists in Cambridge, and our mission is to build on that. So yes, working closely with developers to assess the impacts of their developments and secure high quality sustainable networks for the future.
And seamlessly.
Before you start, sorry to interrupt you. Just about you have to get the flow going there. I should have mentioned that as with all of these things, there's a chat box that we provide through the webinar. On the top right-hand side of your screen, you will see a button edit chat, and into that you can put your questions, your comments. Please be polite, or we will have to kick you out. We've also got a polls button where we put up a couple of polls, which I hope you have a chance to look at as we go through the session, and it'll be interesting to see how the response to those polls comes out. So yes, apologies again, Elliot. Back to you.
Hi all. Elliot Page, Director of Transport at Stantec, based out of our Cambridge office. Often sit on the other side of the fence to David, albeit that sounds very adversarial, and it's certainly not that way. Responsible for, as I say, the Cambridge office, but also the region covers Northampton and Birmingham. Stantec are a multidisciplinary consultancy. Formerly, Stantec UK was sort of formed essentially of Peter Brett Associates, which may be more familiar for a number of you on the call. I believe I've got a number of slides I'm going to talk through, and then hopefully that will facilitate a number of questions and debate amongst the panel. Is that straight in, Hugh? I think. Yep, good. Okay, I'm just going to turn my camera off. Thank you. So my talk is essentially going to cover three main bases. Firstly, I'm going to look at some of the remarkable statistics with regards to the changes in working practices. Then I'm going to sort of focus on the opportunities that may present. And then I think critically, looking at how we create and work to an assessment process that can help to deal with both the uncertainty, but also ensure that the changes being brought about are the futures that we want to achieve. Bear with me. So transport and mobility has always evolved, as I'm sure all of you will be aware. Largely it's been driven by advances in technology and innovation. Internal combustion engine, obviously critical to the growth in explosion in cars, buses and trucks. And the benefits of transport is that it facilitates trade between people, and it's essential really for the progress of society and civilization, and general economic growth. But increasingly, and probably in relatively recent terms, we have become acutely aware of how transport can have negative impacts on our towns and cities, and generally, the contribution transport makes towards sort of CO2 emissions. The graph you're seeing there in the sort of bottom or centre of the slide, but bottom, is really the various sectors within the UK economy that contribute to CO2. And what you'll note is that the transport is very much the poor relation with regards to positive direction of travel. Since 1990, I think there's only been a 2% reduction in surface transport. Even this week, a report was published by the European Environment Agency that suggested that 1 in 8 deaths is contributed by poor living conditions and poor environmental circumstances. Now, whilst we're aware of that, the change in terms of taking positive moves to address that imbalance has been relatively slow. Policy has long talked about it. As far as back as 1994, there was a genuine sea change in the way transport policy was being written up. That obviously has got more and more focused and evolved to another level. But rather frustratingly, the effect in terms of how we're planning and designing our cities and good spatial development and disposition has been a slower burn. The graph on the bottom left-hand side of the slide, the only graph on the slide actually, is the Housing Infrastructure Fund. And interestingly, and I think you can probably make it out, of all the monies sort of handed out, 700 million and the incredible vast majority of that has gone to road building schemes. Now, obviously, there's always a place for roads, and roads are, fundamental when done in the right places to, enabling sites and indeed, helping economic growth. But the imbalance there is really quite stark. That Vision and Reality report was a report that was published early this year. It was undertaken by the New Homes and Foundation for Integrated Transport, and it investigated 20 new and proposed garden villages. And this really was quite sort of depressing in terms of what it found. It said many of these were car dependent, despite the visions being quite positive. Essentially all of the assessment and ultimately the infrastructure and the planning obligations related to a car dependent future. But a lot changed in March 2020. As many of us, if not all of us on this call, may well be finding ourselves sort of sitting in various bedrooms or parts of the house, working from home suddenly became the norm, or it certainly became a much greater proportion of the working population than it ever had been done previously. The change almost happened overnight, and I think it took everyone by essentially a bit of a shock in terms of how quickly we could change. I remember sort of waking up that first morning, getting to grips with the new software, and cast my mind back a year ago, we were still having conference calls. You remember dialing in, and you would have to press your hashtag, and then you'd be put into a sort of virtual waiting room. Whereas now that's almost unheard of. It seems like an era ago. So the change has been dramatic and it's been swift. But bear with me. So I've got notes on a different PC. But the messaging has become slightly conflicted recently. So whilst there are obviously sort of positives about working from home, quite increasingly, central government, Boris has been sort of putting the message out there that we need to get back to work. Vast swathes of the economy are based on footfall outside of stations and dry cleaners close to sort of offices. And there is a feeling within central government that they need to be seen to be driving that return to work, albeit, that is slightly sort of contradictory to, the messages we're getting in the last week in terms of not mixing. So, a number of mixed messages, but you can sort of see government are trying to make that push to get back to some sort of sense of old normality. There are a number of sort of data sets out there. The one I'm showing at the bottom is DFT data. And the 92% figure is a daily total there of motor flows compared back to a week in February. And on the face of it, it kind of looks like we're getting back to normal. And a number of people feel that that is generally the direction that we're now going in. However, there is noise in that data. As I say, that is a September number being compared back to February. And anyone who's close to sort of transport assessment work will know that those 2 months don't really usually talk to each other. And actually, when you do a like-for-like month, we're still 25 to 30% down across a day. And during peak hours, that figure is greater. So the working from home phenomena is still having, a major effect on our working lives. Attitudes and opinions matter. It is very apparent that many people don't want to return to the old normal. In May of this year, a big survey was undertaken, and 50 employers were asked about their willingness to get back to work, and this was undertaken by Go Travel Solutions. And of the people who had previously used train, bus or car as their main mode of travel, there were reductions across all of those in terms of people saying that if they do go back to work, they won't use these modes of travel. And indeed, walking and cycling saw phenomenal increases, albeit from relatively low bases. And in terms of working from home, there are many people who don't actually want to return to the office at all, many who will return far less often than they did previously. And the reasons for doing that are absolutely, varied, from wanting to spend time with pets, from being in for parcel deliveries, better quality of life, kids and schooling requirements, and health, or certainly as part of this survey, wasn't actually featured as one of the reasons. So it's almost as though people's eyes have been open to the opportunity to work from home, and the outputs remain as they were, if not better than previously. But what is very important is that we do consider the types of people that we're talking about here in terms of who have the potential for work from home. It's all very well and good professionals saying, who have all the IT and have the flexibility of working from home, saying that they won't go back. But there are numerous occupations that need to be on the front line and working at their workplaces. So I looked at this, and I've always sort of thought that this is, sometimes an ultimate flaw in some of the arguments that transport profession looks to make. It's always very easy if you've got a sort of professional class job, and that someone's just walking into my room. Edith, out, sorry. Sat in a child's bedroom, very, very apt. But what I did was cross compare the people who said that they had to go to work with the distances that those same occupations travel. What is apparent is that generally speaking, the people who need to get to work are the ones that travel less far, which to my mind presents a little bit of an opportunity for some of the stuff we're going to talk about in subsequent slides and further into the discussion. So what, therefore, do the opportunities present? Well, the first one that I'm going to focus on is the fact that actually, if there are less people travelling at peak hours, and those people who are travelling shorter distances, the opportunity for active travel and micro-mobility surely has to be increased. Now, these aren't new concepts. Active travel campaigners have been saying this for a long time, that we need to repurpose our streets and places so that we are biasing the road space in favour of active modes and more sustainable travel. Very much a build it and they will come type attitude. However, usually there are barriers to that, and many of those barriers relate to working practices. They're expected to be seen at their desks. The infrastructure is not in place for them to travel by bike. They don't feel safe. So I think this is a real opportunity, and I have to pay credit to a number of authorities out there who are really taking the sort of bull by the horns, and under experimental traffic orders reclaiming the workspace while the opportunity exists, with a view to looking at what the results are and seeing if those moves can be made permanent. In terms of the images there, the interesting one on the bottom right-hand side of the slide is Fendon Road roundabout in Cambridge, which was planned to be transformed prior to the pandemic, but is very apt for our times. Right. The second one is a places first approach to our streets and cities, akin to the active mode proposals, but it's about reclaiming the streets. And there are a number of, again, examples of where restaurants have taken the opportunity to bleed into the pavements and even into the carriageways, under the guise of social distancing. it's very much, again, a movement to reclaim the space from the dominance of motor cars, and I can see that being an opportunity for further growth. Public transport, so as you've seen on previous slides, that is a mode or a group of modes that have been hit significantly. The bounce back on public transport is likely to take much longer until people get confidence back that they're not going to get ill, they're not, social distancing can happen safely. And also there's a mindset there, what will be next? Do people want to be, that close, standing on a tube at a peak hour or a busy bus? People's perception of safety and, the pleasure of taking those modes is somewhat questionable now. So therefore, public transport operators and technologists need to have a look at how we can prioritize public transport, make it more reliable, more appealing, and potentially look at booking spaces. On the Arriva Click service, which is that bottom left, you can book a space. It's on-demand transport, and maybe there's a space now for that to particularly grow and move into. The fourth one of these opportunities is freight. So again, going back to that slide in terms of growth in certain areas, while general motor traffic is down, white van traffic has gone up. E-commerce has been an absolute success story off the back of the crisis we found ourselves in. And it's been something which cities and towns have been wrestling with for a while. There's always issues around double handling and not just on time deliveries, but there's always been a willingness to want to embrace the idea of sustainable last mile deliveries, and I think that really now has to move forward in earnest. I think a number of cities are beginning to look at that. A number of cities on the continent are looking at it. I think Holland are leaders. Park and rides on fringes of cities have the opportunity to sort of double up as logistics hubs, which then allows the onward connection of more sustainable last mile deliveries to be undertaken. But all of these changes and the opportunities that they will provide need to be undertaken within a framework that facilitates it. What I mean by that is that the way in which we assess transport schemes needs to evolve, and it needs to be looking to rebalance in favour of more sustainable modes. Much of the business case work we do makes it very, very hard for sustainable modes and public transport to achieve a better cost benefit than the car, just because of the volumes of people who come through certain junctions in a car means that it's always skewed in favour of private vehicular transport. And equally, our sort of transport assessment process has been guilty of that in the past. That circular diagram I have on the left in red is essentially what we term the predict and provide sort of methodology, whereby we kind of look backwards to then cast forwards. And what I mean by that is, if we look at examples of the past where people need access to a car and people are travelling by car, we will only look to provide that in the future, because that's what the assessment says we need to do. Whereas actually what we need to look to adopt is a much more place and objective-led approach, where we actually create a vision and we ensure that at every step of the process and every step of the build and every step of the monitoring, we are making sure that we're talking back to that vision, and that anything that we do that compromises that needs to be questioned and interrogated and asked why. This is an expansion really upon that, and it's really how we deal with uncertainty, because everything I've spoken about today, we don't know what that future holds. The opportunities are there, but at the same time, things may return to normal. We may not get the appetite for the change that I've sort of outlined, and hopefully we will get. And therefore, how do you deal with that uncertainty going forward? Could there be another pandemic? Could there be advances in other sustainable transport? How do you deal with infrastructure and uncertainty and delays? And that is that active planning and management. And out of Stantec in the Cambridge region, it's something which we previously branded Monitor and Manage. There are a number of sites in the area that we've managed to get away without that certainty over what the future looks like, but it ensures that we talk back to this preferable future, and ensuring that at every stage of a strategic build and every transport assessment that is written as part of those phases, we are talking back to what we need to be achieving. And David Allett, who sits on the panel today, sees that from the other side, sees its effectiveness, perhaps some of its weaknesses, but equally, the challenges and the benefits of moving it forward. So in conclusion, conscious of time, just to wrap up, the changes in attitude appear to have set in. You know, COVID concerns are only part of the story, but eyes have perhaps been opened to an alternative future. Many of the usual barriers to change have been removed, and therefore the opportunity to change our urban environments for the better does appear to be genuine. As I mentioned, the changes and the ideas, however, are not new. You know, these are things that have been being called for by transport professionals and placemaking champions for a long time, but they've been confronted by barriers and slightly archaic assessment processes. But, and critically, if the planning process needs to adapt and work with it, to my mind, it already has the flexibility to do so, but it does require local authorities to be forward-looking and brave and manage their members accordingly. That is me done.
Elliot, thank you very much indeed for that very helpful overview, very interesting overview. For once, it wasn't death by PowerPoint. I found those slides very interesting and very illustrative of the points you're making. You talked about sitting on the other side of the barrier or the other side of the table from local authorities and those whose decisions are so important in bringing forward new developments. So over to you, David, to give us your viewpoint.
Excellent. Thanks, Elliot. Pleasure to welcome you all to my side of the table. So here in Cambridgeshire, there's a huge growth ambition, huge growth opportunity. There's a high demand to bring forward new housing and to bring forward new employment sites. But there's a massive challenge, and that challenge is the highway networks are along almost every corridor stuffed. There's opportunity there, though. We do have investment propositions coming forward for transformational transport schemes, whether that be through mass transit, sustainable people movers, or strategic walking and cycling links, as well as the classic highways investment to unplug really problematic points of the network. The problem with these things, and for fellow professionals in this industry on the call, will know that these schemes take a long time to come forward. The demand for development is now, and developments want to proceed even on the new town scale developments where we really want to start to see progress. Everything is sort of stuck until the point that the strategic infrastructure comes forward. Historically, how would we deal with a development? How does the planning process deal with developments? Well, you forecast, you consent it, and then you build it. And it doesn't really matter if that forecasting is incorrect, overly robust, not robust enough. If that forecasting is deemed acceptable, then the development gets a consent, and years down the line, you realise whether or not you've been right. And if you're not right, then you've got a lot of congestion. What we've sought to do in Cambridgeshire is shift that up a little bit to allow us to be more flexible, and to start to bring developments forward in a way where we're not just simply waiting, but also in a way that protects our policy requirement to make sure that no development causes an unsustainable future. So what does the new future look like for us? Well, in some instances, we've been able to forecast, break down the development, then consent the development, and then monitor the development through its early life, knowing that if the results of the monitoring comes back and shows that the development's not working in a sustainable way, the development is effectively paused. We get a huge benefit from that, of seeing how the development works in its early stages. So if we've got a development that's embracing sustainable travel planning, bringing forward specific measures to help to drive that, we can then get a much clearer idea about how future phases of the master plan are going to play out. So we're not taking a huge punt on a huge master plan all in one go. We're cognizant of that at the time that it's coming through planning. We can see where the master plan intends to get to, and we have local plan documents that set that vision out. But we effectively drip feed the quantum of development, ever mindful of monitoring technologies, so we can monitor what is this development doing on a day-to-day basis, how are the trips materializing from the development. And this is the most exciting aspect of my job at the moment on the new developments. I echo lots of things Elliot said in his presentation, and I also just want to echo that as an authority, we're absolutely driven to put in those sustainable travel solutions so we don't suffer the same problems in the past of an over-dependency on the private car. I could talk for hours and hours about the about what's going on in Cambridge and about the technical aspects of this role, because there's many different things to juggle, many different pressures. But I think as a general overview, as for why I think I'm here, that probably does it. So happy to take questions later, and I'll fade away.
Thanks very much indeed, David. Okay, so we've heard it from both sides of the table, from the transport advisor, from the transport decision makers. Veronica, from the occupier's point of view, or indeed from the individual's point of view, as I said earlier, as you explained earlier, you are a psychology professional, you have a psychology degree, and is it all in the mind, how we travel?
Well, we have to bring people along us for the journey, as it were, pardon the pun. And, it is down to individuals at the end of the day. If not, individuals make up our communities, make up our societies. So we have to look at individual behaviour change. And whilst we can change organisations and structures, actually it does come down to the individual and their mindset. But the good thing is that there are a lot of things we can do to help people to change their mindset on travel. And that's part of the work that we've been doing at Milton Park. Obviously, some of that is the psychology, some of it is also putting in place the right kind of infrastructure and the right kind of facilities to enable people to make that change. But I think it's timely to remind ourselves that, transport, it doesn't just serve us, it supports our society, it shapes our society, it shapes who we are. And it's absolutely integral that we maintain a public transport system going forwards, despite what we've seen in recent months. Every year at Milton Park, we do an annual travel survey, and we've been doing that for the last 4 years. And what we've seen is a gradual increase in the number of people who either don't use a car to get to work or don't have access to a car. And that number is around 40% of our 9,000 occupiers who don't use a car. And we really need to make sure we're making provision for them. And certainly those are the very people who we hailed as heroes of the pandemic, the people who are coming into work every day, into our laboratories, and the people who supported those staff in our labs. So we really do need to make sure that we've got a system that works for them. And yes, it is going to change, but we do need to restore confidence in public transport use and make sure that people who don't have access to a car can still get to work in a safe and an affordable way. And I think that's something that we too often forget. So at Milton Park, we've put a lot of initiatives into place. We've got a free bike share scheme, which also has e-bikes in it now. And we saw during the pandemic that a lot of our key workers were using those, not just for the journeys, the local journeys, which we saw prior to the pandemic and prior to introducing the e-bikes, but we're now seeing those e-bikes go all the way to Oxford and back several times a week, which is really great to see that people are recognising the benefit and the potential of e-bikes for those slightly longer journeys. But public transport will always have a place to play for those people who really don't have access to a bike or can't cycle for whatever reason. And I think we really need to move away from the car-dominated approach now to more of a co-modal approach, where we're looking at a mixture of cars, of buses, of bikes. Most people who use a bike share scheme use it in conjunction with a bus or a bike. So we need to think about those integrated journeys and how they all link up. And again, at Milton Park, we've introduced a new platform in conjunction with some partners, Zipabout in Oxford, as part of our AV project. And the platform really is trying to integrate those journeys and make those journeys seamless, whether that's in a car or car path away or car sharing. But we really need to start thinking about reducing the number of cars on the road to make it easier for everyone to travel. And remember that part of the reason people don't use buses is because they feel they get stuck in traffic or they're waiting for a bus for a long time. And the reason they're getting stuck in traffic is because we have too many cars on the road and not enough people using the buses. So we've got to get that balance right, really, for society to continue to function even in this post-COVID world.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Can we leave the camera on you, because one of the questions that came up was in response to our poll question. Poll question read, if methods of transport are changing, where should investment be targeted? We suggested light trams, cycle pathways, car parks, buses, electric car points. And one of our listeners has asked a question as to whether or not we should have included integrated transport systems as one of the alternatives. And I wonder if you could just give us a bit of a better explanation as to what you mean or you understand is meant by an integrated transport system.
Well, I think it all needs to function together, and we've got to stop relying on our cars from getting from A to B, from door to door. So we need to think of other ways of travelling. We need to think about how our trains connect with our our buses and our bike share schemes. So integrated transport is really looking at the whole fabric of everything, all the offer that's out there, and really mix and matching from a menu of trams, buses, whatever it might take to get people's journeys to be as seamless and as affordable as possible, and also as attractive as this steel box that we seem to be absolutely in love with. And so integrated transport absolutely should be part of the offer and part of the future, and that's what we should be investing in. And I think we're seeing that already. We're seeing people choosing, whether that's scooters. Certainly in Europe, scooters are now very much part of that integrated transport system. And Europe's got some great examples of platforms that integrate every single form of transport across a city, so you can choose your journey and be offered a whole raft of different ways of getting from A to B. And that's what we need to be moving towards, and that's what I understand by a fully integrated transport system. And sorry, the other thing to say on that's integrated in terms of ticketing and fares, and that's something we've still got a long way to go on, and that's becoming even more important now, with people working more flexibly, part of the week from home. People don't want to buy a season ticket anymore. It's not advantageous to them to look to buy a season ticket. So we need to make the ticketing system integrated as well, so that you pay for your journey in one place and you travel all the way through on that one ticket.
Can I ask you to leave your camera on, Veronica, and then bring in David? We can have all of you on screen at the same time. David, could we have your thoughts on integrated transport systems and how Cambridge County Council are looking at these, or whether they're looking at them, and if so, what traction there is for introducing them?
Well, absolutely. When I was looking at this poll as well, my kind of instinctive response was we need to be investing in all of these things because they all complement each other, and people's travel habits change based on things like the weather, just the type of journey that they want to make. And really, when you think of great cities that you visit and cities that are perceived as being sustainable and cities that work, you will often see these modes running side by side and interacting with each other seamlessly. And I think that's the future that all our cities need to be aiming for. Ticketing is one of the key challenges there, making sure that you could, for example, hire an electric bike, and then perhaps if later in the day you want to come back on public transport, the cost is all sort of captured in with a single ticket or a single service, a subscription type service even. And we're open to doing that, but I recognise there are challenges commercially to get to that point. In terms of when we're looking at the corridors, our congested transport networks, often what we do is we do a strategic study on the area to understand what the solutions look like, and it will be unsurprising that the conclusions come out is that we need to invest in multiple modes to solve the same problem. We might not even need to invest on the corridor itself. It might be we need to invest on another corridor because we're actually seeing a symptom of another problem. So the big challenge then is there enough funding to do this? And that's a really big challenge. As an authority, we work with developers to get some of their funding and make sure that their designs facilitate the future of travel integration through transport hubs where everything comes together. And in our dialogue with government, we just make it very clear that it's not a single mode solution. Everything needs to complement each other.
Elliot, could I bring you in here? I'd like to talk about cost of public transport, because something I've noticed when one travels in a European city, for example Paris, the cost of a tube ticket is very, very low compared with what it is in London. I freely confess that I don't travel by public transport locally. If I have to nip into London, I will always catch the train or catch the bus, because driving into London is just a joke. But how do you see that cost is an issue in developing these systems and encouraging people out of the cars and into public transport? I think we might need your mic on, Elliot. Are you muted, Elliot? We seem to be losing Elliot. Well, whilst we try and get Elliot back in, Veronica or David, what do you think about the issue of cost? I mean, obviously, it doesn't cost you a lot to cycle 32 miles round trip every day, Veronica, but...
I think, you know, it's all relative, isn't it? Yes, transport is expensive here compared to Europe, but people often underestimate the true cost of running a car. And I think, you know, that's something that we really need to think about, is all that extra time, all those extra hours you might need to work to run that second car, for instance. And I think, you know, factoring in the true cost of motoring is something we don't look at. We look at the fuel cost. We might look at our maintenance costs, but actually the cost of purchasing that car, of running it, of keeping it on the road, we don't always factor that all in. And I think we really need to reevaluate really what our values are in terms of that cost of motoring.
I think you mentioned, possibly in a piece that I read by you, that that for every 1p that we spend on a car, it costs the government 9p. Could you explain that?
Yeah, and I think that's you know, it's that society cost of motoring. For every pound that we spend on motoring, on driving, it costs society £9. You know, for every pound spent on walking, it costs society a penny, and for cycling it's 8p. So I think we need to have a different way of assessing the costs at an individual level, but also at a societal level, and really valuing, you know, what we are trying to do with this whole different way of approaching things. And you know, I noticed that somebody talked about locking in the behaviours that we saw during the pandemic, of more people cycling, more people working from home. And I think, you know, we do need to have a balance. I don't think we're all going to go back to the office full time. I don't think we're ever going to see that. But we do still need our officers. We still need to connect at a human level. And I think, you know, we can lock in some of those benefits. But ultimately, we've got to find a way of travelling, you know, in this new way of doing things, on odd days here and odd days there, of getting to the office so we can get together and be collaborative and creative in a way that the screen just doesn't
that's
allow us
a definite
to do.
theme that's coming from our sessions, is that the need for physical presence in the office is so important. Whilst it's nice to be working from home because you have a ghastly commute from time to time, the need for human communication, which you simply can't get through Zoom or conference calls, is so important. Elliot, have we got you back?
Oh, bro.
Yeah, good. Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. Did you have any thoughts on the cost of public transport and what can be done about that? Should there be, for example, should there be more government subsidy?
Well, I think there needs to be a levelling up. I think the broader appreciation of the cost of the car, as Veronica explained it, is absolutely true. I think societal costs need to be brought to the fore so that it enters that debate. But yeah, you know, on the face of it, you need to be able to feel confident that you can afford a trip into town with, you know, 2 kids and two adults, and it's not going to break the bank. So levelling up, but equally a broader debate around the true costs is necessary. One of the things I did want to touch upon was just a sort of micro mobility, and I think David mentioned it in his thing, and I think, you know, the potential for that is vast and huge, and I'm excited about it, in the sense that, you know, whilst transport practitioners and authorities debate legislation and infrastructure, it almost seems to be an organic, you know, growth amongst the people. You know, I live on a particular street which is a bit of a thoroughfare and always has been for cycles in and around Cambridge, but the number of electric, micromobility vehicles that come past my door being used by all types of the society is growing almost by the day, if not the hour, it sometimes seems. And I think that really has a role to play going forward in terms of city connectivity and an integrated transport system. And equally, I think into the future, whilst it may seem alien for an elderly person to be going down the road on a sort of e-skateboard or something similar, actually generationally, as they grow up with it, it may seem as familiar as watching an elderly person on a bike. I think it's exciting times, and a lot of it has, as I say, come from sort of tech professions as opposed to transport professions.
It hasn't got a wholehearted support in Paris, has it? Where there's a rash of e-scooters, but that may be more to do with the regulations as to how they're used, as opposed to intrinsically what they are.
Yeah, I think that's true, Matthew, Hugh, and I think the UK in many ways is in a fortunate position that we've sat back and watched and learned from other cities, and we've now got a really good body of evidence about what works with e-scooters, and we're seeing some fantastic models coming forward now. Tier, one of the major e-scooter companies, has now got a model where you have a box with a helmet in it and a battery swap out system. So these e-scooters are housed in hubs rather than being littered all over the streets. And I know lots of authorities around the UK are looking at new kind of models for running e-scooter trials. And whatever you think of them, I think they are going to come. Personally, I'm a fan. I like them. I think we do need to get the offer right. We need to make sure that their speeds are moderated and that they're used in the right way. But I don't think that is an impossible task, and I think we can do that. And my personal experience is when I've ridden a bike alongside e-scooters, I find that absolutely fine. Maybe that's my style of riding, or maybe because I've got an e-bike, I don't know. But I think they're here to come. They're here to stay. Really, certainly, we'll be seeing a lot more of them on our streets.
I just want to look at one of the polls, encouraging our listeners to look into the polls. But one of them leads into another point which I wanted to raise: methods of transport changing. Where should the investment be targeted? The predominant answers are cycle pathways and electric car points. So it's the individual choice again, isn't it? People do seem to want to be able to make their own decisions and to do it when they want to do it, to travel when they want, to use their own, if not vehicles, then at least their bikes and their scooters. In other words, and I must say that although I do live in a village, and it would have been almost impossible from a time point of view to have got to Milton Park, where I used to work, through any other means than the car. It's how you integrate all of the public transport to save time, or at least to make it not a time-consuming exercise. I think I worked out that it would have taken me 2.5 hours to get from my village, which is 12 miles from Milton Park, each way, which is obviously completely impracticable. Gosh, where do we go? Where do we take that point? I'm not entirely sure. Do you have any thoughts? Yes, David.
I think public transport, one of the big challenges of public transport is that it's simply not being attractive enough, because often you're stuck in the same traffic as the car, except you don't get the convenience of your own personal space and your vehicle. But we know that public transport, when it works, can be hugely effective in moving large numbers of people point to point in a way that can be reliable, can be affordable with the right ticketing offer, and it can be also hassle-free as well. You can have a sleep, for example, or things that you can't or shouldn't do when you're driving. So part of our sustainable transport offer is making public transport where it can be most effective, and that means segregated direct routes. In Cambridgeshire, we have the guided busway, which is very well used. So that is a route that the bus, start to finish of its journey, it's not interacting with traffic, and our mayor's long-term plan is to build on that model, perhaps with different technology, driverless, maybe even underground in challenging sections of the city. But I think in order to get people onto public transport, we need to recognise that public transport needs to be part of a balanced transport diet and integrate well with the modes. So that means coming off a strategic corridor, perhaps even by car, off the main A road or motorway network, parking it at a park and ride, and then jumping effectively on a rapid shuttle into the busy city where the congestion problems are most pronounced. And that's some of the techniques that we're looking at in Cambridge to help public transport thrive.
Absolutely. Can I move on to we've got about 10 minutes left, and we could spend an entire session on what I'm going to introduce now. But we are UK Property Forums. We concentrate on the Thames Valley, but also on the Arc and the cities and towns at either end and between those key cities, Oxford and Cambridge. We heard on the session yesterday, I don't know how many of you were on the session yesterday, that the Arc is happening. It is an enormous, there is enormous pressure to deliver the potential that the Arc is offering. And I was interested to know how much communication there is between each of the points in the Arc, and what the collaboration is, and how you are achieving some kind of consensus as to what should be delivered in terms of the transport network. Whether or not the expressway will be built is an interesting question. I suspect in our new post-COVID times, the idea of building a 100-mile motorway is probably not a terribly popular option. But if we could concentrate on the communication that's going on between the local authorities, between the points in the Arc, it would be very interesting to hear your views on that, and whether or not more needs to be done. David, could you perhaps kick us off on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So it probably falls outside of my day-to-day role, but we do have a strategy team that is engaged very much on these things, because we recognise that ultimately for any investment scheme, be it a highway scheme or a rail scheme, sustainable scheme, it's only going to be successfully delivered through collaboration and through communication. So from the very get-go, groups are established where the key stakeholders can come together and make it very clear what potential they see and what challenges they see. And then you can get to a point where you understand what issues may become problematic between one authority and another. You can get a very clear sense of the shared benefits and what really needs to be focusing on. So whilst I'm not always directly involved in these discussions personally, I know that we have a huge strategic influence on these things, and that is fundamentally driven by collaboration.
Elliot, many of Stantec's clients will be property developers wanting to understand how best to deal with the transport issues in their schemes. Do you feel that there is enough engagement soon enough on transport issues when developments are being proposed?
Yeah, there is. And what I mean by that is, the scale of scheme that we often involve ourselves in has to have a transport conversation at the outset. In many ways, the land that is being considered is being enabled through the strategic musings of where future infrastructure may go. The same is true of the East West Rail proposals as they come forward, and the same is true of the expressway. There have been numerous conversations that have been held around potential sites that could come forward. So I think that the transport conversation and that integration with the Camcox Arc is happening. What I feel perhaps isn't happening, and I'm not necessarily, the first person closest to it, is a conversation about housing totals. How do the individual local plans relate to the 1 million new homes in the Arc? How are they being accounted for? And I've sort of asked the question, or been on periphery of conversations around it, and it doesn't appear to my mind that some of those conversations are yet happening. And I think that would be beneficial to all, just to understand housing totals, and indeed from the transport authorities to begin to focus their thinking with regards to infrastructure solutions going forward, because otherwise it will be sort of cart in front of the horse, and then we'll be playing catch up.
Yes, I think as one of you said earlier, it's we've got to get it in the right order. There's no point inventing a transport solution when the development is being completed, because you're always going to end up with second best, I would suggest. Yeah. Well, we're approaching the end. We've got five minutes or so. I'm just wondering whether or not we could move possibly towards a bit of news I heard this morning. BP were on the radio this morning saying that they are changing their investment they're concentrating on investment into renewable energy now. And is this, do you think, a symptom of where we're heading? Out of cars into more sustainable methods of transport, sustainable energy sources and the like.
I mean, from my perspective, sorry to cut across. I mean, I read a similar article the other day. I think, you know, the global oil industry was forecasting peak oil, I think, for circa sort of 2050, after which point there'd be a sort of downturn. But the article I read suggested that actually a number of the you know, key thinkers in the industry, sort of the macroeconomists, believe that peak oil may now have been reached, and that is 20 years sooner than previous. So I suppose we should welcome that, you know, and out of this crisis has potentially come a positive change.
Yeah, I echo that, and it's much like the public transport versus car argument in a way that the public transport is often seen as a compromised type of journey, a sacrifice that somebody has to make, and that's not the case in the same way that renewables are not a sacrifice or compromise. The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stone. It's a case of renewable energy presents a great opportunity to do things better. So I think it's just really encouraging that investment is going this way. And yes, it's unfortunate what's driven this, but in the long term, we just see an energy system that delivers huge benefits, including commercial benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. I think, you know, we have to change. We've got no option but to change if we're going to stick within the 1.5 degree ceiling that we're going to try and achieve. I mean, we're going to have to year on year reduce our emissions by 7.6%. Now, in the lockdown, in the peak of the lockdown period, you know, emissions fell by a third, but we're still projecting that we will only have achieved a 7% decrease by the end of 2020. So we really do need to take some bold, decisive action now. My only thing to say would be to say that we mustn't forget the people element of this. Quite often we put in infrastructure, we do all these great things, but we don't really think about the behaviour change elements or how we motivate or incentivise people to change. And Milton Park, we've used a lot of best practice in terms of incentives and rewards to get people to change, whether that's a free breakfast for cycling to work, whatever it might be. And yes, we do need the sticks, but we also need those carrots, and the sticks can help to pay for the carrots as well. So I think we really need to think about the human element in that journey going forward. And just remember that you know, we're in a very, people say they've declared a climate emergency, and it's kind of almost coming off the tongue like a glib statement, but this is the climate emergency. This is it. We don't get a second chance. There won't be another one. This is the one we have to deal with now, or certainly our children and grandchildren won't be thanking us unless we do take some decisive, bold action.
I think that I'd like to leave it there. I mean, we only have a couple of minutes to go in any event, but if ever there was a message that we need to deliver to inspire people to come up with solutions which are, I don't think it's putting it too dramatically, designed to save the planet, then that is where the effort should be. And how that's fed into the proposals and schemes, well, you guys are the experts, and I'm sure that you're going to be able to come up with the solutions. But it seems to me that there is an overarching desire to achieve these results, and it encourages me that not only are you guys who are at the forefront in the vanguard of these developments, you guys are fully aware of them and fully conscious of the need to provide them. I was going to put myself back on the screen, but I think it's time to go. I think to start embarking on another discussion, we wouldn't get far with it with less than a minute to go. So I'd just like to say thank you to everybody who's joined us today. We have a couple more sessions to go, which Matthew will be chairing. The next one will be at 1 o'clock, and that's going to be on
Industrial Revolution.
the Industrial Revolution, the third Industrial Revolution, which we're undergoing. And then we have other sessions on business parks and one other. No, I think that's it, isn't it?
Yeah,
So it's business parks and the Industrial Revolution, yeah. And that'll bring us to an end of our festival. It's odd to call such an event a festival, but it has been a festival of thought and ideas. And thank you to all of our presenters, and specifically today, thank you to Veronica, to David, and to Elliot for a very interesting discussion. I wish you well in all of your endeavours, and we hope to be in touch with you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks
Thanks
very
all.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.